Welcome back to the Huddle. Today I'm with Bill Speros, Senior Betting Analyst for Gambling.com Group. How are you today, Bill?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Of course, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I was wondering if we could start today with why do you believe the NFL draft always kind of gains a betting interest among users around this time of year?
Well, I think the primary reason is that the NFL, is king, right? It drives about 40% of the betting handle across the legal books in the United States. And people can't get enough of it. We still have to wait 6 months for opening night, Philly versus fill in the blank. So, this gives people an opportunity to bet on the NFL in April. I mean, that's frankly the driving force behind it, and the push to from the books to get it included in the states when they were going through the legalization process.
Of course, and in what ways can sportsbooks kind of manage and develop odds in real time, especially for an event that's kind of based off of rumors or reports that come out instead of actual play on the field?
Yeah, that was really my question this year. I really wanted to kind of get into that a little bit because of the fact that it is sort of an ongoing event, and it's not a game where you can see the bases loaded and nobody out, in a game that's 3-2 and your total's 8. You can adjust that total in real time or take it down to adjust it. In the NFL draft, the news is abrupt and it's often unexpected. So, in much the same way that you and I are glued to social media or watching it live, the books themselves really do the same thing. They do just what you and I do. They have, their own insiders, their own people that they trust to give them information. Obviously you have your Schefters and your Ian Rappaports and those guys. And you also have a lot of team reporters, a lot of people who cover teams, team specific sites and legacy media outlets in certain areas like New York and Boston and Pittsburgh and Chicago, where they are plugged into those teams. So you really have to keep your eye open, and they do the same thing. And from their perspective, not only are they watching and looking for the same news that you and I are watching for, they're also looking for betting irregularities. If you're looking at a number 10 pick and all of a sudden they see someone put a large sum of money on someone who's not even on the radar to go at that spot, that's a red flag. And they call it a ticker because that's sort of, what you think of like the stock ticker back in the day, or the literal ticker, where the scores would come up on the games every 10 minutes. They call it a ticker, but it's just really a service where they can track every bet that's placed on the site in real time. So they could just plug in certain search terms, and if there's a certain player name and a large amount of money gets dumped on that player for no apparent reason, that's a red flag, because that's a tell that somebody knows something. And depending on who the bettor is, because they have all that information, they might make a decision to pull a market immediately, even before something happens, just based on betting activity, not necessarily based on news. So it is it's a challenge for them. And a lot of smaller operators don't really do a lot on the draft. It's not a moneymaker. It's a difficult event for the sports books to manage. It's a difficult event for them to price, and things fall through the cracks. It's not like a live game where you have, one event and 15 or 20 operators are tracking it. They're all getting the same data from the same source at the same time, so they can all make adjustments based on what's known or expected. Here you have so many outlets, real and imagined, reporting on what's true and what isn't true. And that's the other thing, is you have to also verify what is true. We had that episode with Will Levis last year, where it was a Reddit post, I think, if memory serves, and that rattled his market. And there was no truth to it. So again, you have to be really careful, and the books have to be extraordinarily careful because there are not just that there are AI powered betting systems that are looking for gaps in odds. There are sharps that are looking for gaps. Everyone's looking for an edge, and even if it's a minute or 30 seconds where there's a huge disparity in a market, somebody's going to jump in and take advantage. So it is a
Yeah,
very extensive. It's not like something that's easy. It's not simple. It is a challenge for them. And a lot of books don't like the draft, and they mostly don't make money on it, but they do it because customers want it.
yeah, no, absolutely. I can understand why it's such a popular event, but why certain operators may have hesitancy towards it. My apologies there. And I was kind of wondering, you mentioned other events, like games that are happening in real time. How does the NFL draft compare to other events such as the NBA or NHL playoffs that we're seeing just start now?
Well, I think for one, you're probably going to get a lot more action on the NFL draft, given that it's a one-off versus any individual NBA or NHL game. But again, it's a different set of information. In a basketball game, you have multiple data points that an operator is going to use when setting a line or when adjusting a line in game. And you have a built-in lag between when you make an adjustment and when something happens. So they're getting it, when you watch a game on TV or streaming, NFL, I think it's a 35-second delay. I would imagine it's something close in the NBA. By the time you see what you see on your TV screen or on your online stream, it's already happened. So the operators get real-time data. So they're able to make adjustments as the game happens. And they all get the same data at the same time. And it's real. In other words, yesterday the Celtics ripped off, I think it was a 15-2 run in the third quarter. That was real data. So they were able to make real-time adjustments as the Celtics expanded their lead, both on the point total and on the spread, which they covered. So that's hard data. That's real stuff. NFL draft, not so much. It's rumor, it's innuendo, you know. Uh, Not to brag, but I'll brag. I was Schefter's editor 28, 26, 27 years ago. We worked together in Denver. Known him ever since. Great guy. Totally 100% believe whatever he says. But, it's still not always correct. Whereas the Celtics 15-2 run was correct. You know what I'm saying? It is
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
always that risk where betting is mitigated risk. And just because the Celtics went on a big run, it didn't mean Orlando wasn't going to come back. So the books will price all that in, but they're dealing in facts. You're never quite sure about what's going to happen until, maybe someone like a rap sheet or Schefter reports it because they've already vetted it with their sources. So that they've vetted what they're going to report. Other times from other sources, you don't necessarily see that. But the question is, do you act on it? It doesn't mean they're wrong, but you don't know that. So again, it's a lot of unknown. It's really dealing with unknown. And the bottom line for all the operators, and I actually got the people at Fanatics to go on the record about this, and I had a lot of people go off the record about this, but they all basically said the same thing. The real challenge in the draft is just trying to mitigate the risk. It's really just trying to side every play so they don't get caught, with their proverbial pants down. Whereas, for instance, you could have a situation where Saquon Barkley was minus 200 to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. And they kept pushing that number and pushing it and pushing it. And no one took the other side. Everybody bet the guy to score, right? They couldn't side that. The liability was huge. And thankfully for the books, he didn't score. Otherwise, they would have gotten clobbered. on that game because he was in every parlay. That was like in every parlay. So that was a save. That was a huge save for the books. But as hard as they tried, they couldn't balance that play, pushing it down to minus 200. Here, is so much more immediate that they don't have the luxury of trying to do that. So it's really a challenge to it's like you have the risks team. You have the risk team that says, okay, we need to shield our liability at X number of dollars. We don't want to be more than 100,000. Just putting out a number. We don't want to be more than $100,000 and a liability on any given market, no matter what happens. So we'll and then but the trading team says, the Titans are going to take Will Campbell. Cam Ward at number one. We already know that. So that's how you get to minus 20,000, right?
Hmm.
You have the trading team saying this is going to happen. And the risk team says, okay, well, we'll put it up there, but it's minus 20,000, which means you have to bet $200 to win a dollar, right? it's a, unless you're betting so much money, you want a quick 2% on your return, I suppose it's worth it. But, that's kind of a crazy, crazy type of wager. But they'll give it to you because you're always going to get somebody that's going to play the other side, right? Even though we know the Titans going to take this guy, some guy will put $10 saying that they don't, and that's just free money for the books, right? There's always somebody looking to be the contrarian, and the books that they're happy to take your money. If you're willing to give it to them, they're happy to take it.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you sharing that insight. Are there any trends you've noticed for 2025, as you mentioned, with like Will Levis or Cam Ward going number one overall, that you've noticed leading up to the draft?
There's been a lot of talk about trades this week, and I think part of that is because as you get closer to the draft, I think that's when teams get a little bit more serious about talking trades. And I mean, part of this is because I follow the Patriots. There's a lot of noise around the Patriots at number four. There were rumors over the weekend that they were trying to get AJ Brown. There's still talk that they might make a deal with Chicago to move down and maybe take Ashton Genty, take the running back instead of taking Will Campbell or Abdul Carter if he's available. So you do kind of hear a lot about trades. I haven't really seen much data about any particular trends. I think what you're going to see is as we get toward Tuesday night and people start diving into these numbers, you'll see some plays in some markets that look good. But again, I would focus on trying to find those gaps and the odds of let's say player A is let's say your team is drafting 10th. If your team is picking 10th and you're the Bears or let's do the 49ers, they're picking 11th, right? And the odds for player A to be picked 11 is minus 120, but the odds for the 49ers to pick player A is plus 110, right? So you sort of have the same play in different languages at different odds. So you might want to look for that if you're really comfortable about, one thing that Johnny Avello from DraftKings told me, and I thought it was really good advice. He said, look at the teams that you know. Like if you're not a Panthers fan, or if you don't follow the Panthers, or if you're not following, a certain player, like why would you bet on the Panthers pick if you don't really follow the Panthers, right? I mean, it's an unnecessary risk where you could take a team that you follow, like if you're a diehard 49ers fan, you kind of know what they need. You know what your team needs in the draft. You kind of know, what their traditions are, what their proclivities are. And that's about as good as information as you're going to get outside of breaking news. Again, I'll use the Patriots as an example because I cover them, I follow them. That obviously they need an offensive tackle, they need a left tackle, but no one's in love with Will Campbell. But if he's there at number four and they don't make a trade, they're going to take him. So what do? You're betting on whether or not they're going to make a trade.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know why. What value is there to trade up to four in this draft? I don't see it. Um, unless the Bears would do it to get past the Raiders to get the running back. But I don't
Yeah.
think, why would you make that trade? So again, it's what makes sense. What does the team need? Who's making the decisions? I mean, a lot of these teams, it really pays to know who's making the decision, right? There's been a lot of GM, there's GM changes every year. So that's another thing you might want to look for too. If you're looking at a certain team or a certain pick, who's the GM making the pick? And is that a new GM? Obviously, a new GM is going to be a little bit more, I would say, risk averse than an old, somebody wants to come in and make a splash. A newer GM might be more tempting to take a skill player at a certain position, rather than you can never go wrong taking a lineman, right? Offensive or defensive lineman. You're never going to be crucified for taking like a defensive end in the draft. So you can always do that. But if you're in a situation where you got to take a risk, then you might look at that, you might look at Genty up high, you might look at one of the other
Hmm.
quarterbacks. You might look at one of these second or third wide receivers after the kid from Arizona. So there's always, that plays into it too. So there, it's a very nuanced. It's much like betting on the Oscars, where it's as much an art as a science. This
Hmm.
is really the same thing because you're betting on someone's decision. You're not betting on the outcome of an event. Very different things at play. Ball game, some guy hangs a curveball, you lose 6-5. But these are all conscious decisions, and it's a different skill set and it's a different data set. And it is like an outlier for a sporting book, a sports book to book something like this. And then you have 7 states, including big ones, like New York, that don't even allow it for just this reason that you and I are discussing, because it's not a outcome that we don't know. Somewhere, somebody knows who the Giants are going to take with that third pick. You know, they might not know it until like they're on the clock, or in the case of the Vikings a few years ago, they're on the clock and they never make a pick, right? You know, that's funny. I have not seen a price on a no pick because we know that's happened once. I've never seen a market on that.
Well, I
I'm
think with
sure
10 minutes to make a pick, it'd be kind of difficult
you have no
nowadays, but
pick, right?
they did do it, yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
was kind of wondering also, like, you mentioned the information, like betting on teams that you know, and then how some operators, it's all about mitigating risk with the draft. Is that kind of how bettors can go about playing the draft in a responsible and safe manner as they
well,
wager?
yeah. I mean, that's I always give the same three pieces of advice when it comes to betting. My first piece of advice is do not bet. My second piece of advice is set your budget. Only bet what you can afford to lose. And again, it's whatever you're comfortable with financially, where you can lose this money but not put yourself in any sort of financial peril. And third, and this is really the most important, is if you indeed use your budget, don't chase your losses and walk. So let's say you have 100, you said, okay, I bet $100 a week on the NFL. I'm going to bet $100 on the draft. That's a reasonable. I would say I would look at whatever your weekly budget is for the NFL, maybe take what you bet on the NFL in college and combine it and then divide it by two. That would be a good number to set aside for the draft, because it's really the equivalent of a full weekend of football in terms of what you're looking at. So I would never, I wouldn't risk more than what you would risk during a regular season week in the NFL or a regular season college football. That's really number one. You want to, mitigate your risk by mitigating the amount you're going to bet. And I would look at both overall markets in the first round and maybe some specific markets. There's two plays that have caught my eye. One is the total on offensive plays in the first round. It's 15 and a half. I've looked at about 10 mock drafts from CBS and ESPN. I haven't counted more than 15 in any of those drafts in terms of offensive players. And and then the other asterisk here is, how is Travis Hunter going to be counted? Is he going to be considered a wide receiver or cornerback? And I think the books are kind of leaving themselves open on that one a little bit. That's going to be a judgment call, but I do like the under on 15 and a half offensive players. Travis Hunter notwithstanding. I've seen some drafts where there's only like 12 or 13.
Hmm.
And then the other one that I'm hung up on, Jackson Dart. There's a narrative that he's going to end up in Pittsburgh, but because they need a quarterback, obviously. But I think that Jalen Milroe is going to be around in that spot. The total for quarterbacks in the first round is 2.5. I've seen a lot of updated drafts that are pushing Milroe and or Jackson Dart out of the first round. But I have a feeling that you're going to see either the Steelers or maybe even the Chiefs look for a backup, or the Steelers look for somebody who might, they're talking about Shadura following all the way to Pittsburgh now. So that's a market to keep an eye on. I mean, if Aaron Rodgers signs or comes to a decision with the Steelers, then you want to hammer the under on 2.5. And then the other one that's caught my eye is Jackson Dart's draft position, 24 and a half. I've seen one mock draft that has him at 21 to Pittsburgh. I haven't seen him one other draft had him in the first round at like 30. I haven't seen him anywhere else. Even in the first round, and he's not going to be there on Thursday now, which could be for any reason, but he's not going to be there on Thursday. So that's at DraftKings. And I think some of these markets, they might not, they just might not be catching up to them. So those were two that I looked at that I liked. I think Abdul Carter is probably going to end up third. He might even go third to the Giants. Again, another team without a quarterback, but I don't think you're the Giants. I don't think you want to take a quarterback at 3 and put him in that situation, frankly. I don't think they want to do that. So, those are some of the particular plays that have caught my eye that I've been trying to follow. Just because, trying to see what might be available. But I would certainly look for spreads on the same type of wager, team versus number. Position totals are good. That's another simple bet to make where, if you want to bet, oh, I think so and so is going to go at number 8, that's great. But you don't want to use all your budget for that, because then you want to pick something that'll keep you involved throughout the entire round, give you a reason to keep watching it. So that's why you might want to look at a total for positions. Like I said, I would go under on offensive players. I probably go under on the quarterbacks still. I just don't think they're dropping. There just doesn't seem like a whole lot of love. On that, I'd go over on a Jackson Dart at 24 and a half. And probably there was one other market. Total defensive lineman.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of I appreciate that insight, definitely, Bill. And I, thank you again for joining us on the huddle today. I've been Kirk Eller, and we'll see you next time.